Dawn over the savannah. A giant slowly rises from a murky puddle, covered in mud and with fangs as long as a human finger. It's a warthog, one of the most dangerous inhabitants of the African plains. It could kill a full-grown leopard with a single swipe of its fangs. But a minute later, a creature the size of a teacup runs up to this monster, and the giant freezes, submissively offering its neck. Who's really in charge here? Did you know that a small mongoose can safely approach the jaws of an animal that can kill a predator twice its size? In this episode, you'll learn why warthogs voluntarily allow mongooses to crawl over their bodies, and what exactly happens during this strange encounter. Like and subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. The savannah awakens slowly. First, the sky turns pink. Then the fog over the river begins to thin, and silhouettes emerge from the tall grass. Warthogs are creatures of habit. Every morning they come to the same mud puddles, wallow in them, and then head out to graze. Mud is no mere indulgence for them. It protects their skin from the sun and insect bites, but this protection has a side effect. Ticks gather in the drying mud, in the folds of the skin, in the ears, and around the warthog's eyes. Dozens, sometimes hundreds of the parasites burrow into the skin and feed on blood. It would seem that scratching yourself on a tree or rubbing yourself against a rock is not difficult. Warthogs do just that. But there are places the animal itself can never reach. The ears, the eyelids, the area under the chin, the folds on the face. The warthog doesn't have a flexible tongue like a giraffe or long legs like a monkey. Just a hard snout, adapted for digging, and that's it. It's physically incapable of cleaning its own face. And that's where this episode's hero, the dwarf mongoose, Helogale parvula, comes in. One of Africa's smallest predators, weighing just over 200 grams and measuring about 20 centimeters in length, tail excluded. At first glance, it's nothing special. A nimble, striped and bustling animal that lives in large family groups and hunts insects. But dwarf mongooses have a habit that has puzzled researchers for decades. They clean warthogs. Not just one, and not randomly, but in entire flocks, regularly, in the same groups of animals. The first detailed observations of this behavior were documented by zoologists in Queen Elizabeth National Park in Uganda back in the late 1990s, and were later confirmed in other regions of East Africa. Scientists noted that the mongooses approached the warthogs neither stealthily nor in panic. They did so calmly, as if on schedule. Picture this. A warthog stops in an open area in the shade of an acacia tree. A flock of mongooses approaches, sometimes 5, sometimes 15. The first reaction of an onlooker is alarm. After all, mongooses, despite their cute appearance, are true predators. They eat insects, small rodents, eggs, and sometimes even snakes. The warthog has young, vulnerable skin and open wounds. Shouldn't such an encounter end in an attack? But something quite the opposite happens. The warthog doesn't run away or defend itself. It lies on its side or freezes in place, as if to say, "I'm fine, go ahead." And the mongooses begin. They climb onto the giant's back, rummage around its ears, and carefully probe the folds of skin on its muzzle, places the warthog itself can't reach. It's like a real operation. Only instead of scalpels, there are small, tenacious paws and sharp teeth. And instead of a surgeon, there's a whole team of tiny specialists. What are the mongooses doing there? They're looking for ticks. Every tick that burrows into a warthog's skin is a protein capsule for the mongoose. The animal bites the parasite right out of its host's skin, consumes it on the spot, and moves on to the next one. For the mongoose, this isn't charity. It's a meal delivered right to its doorstep. Only the doorstep, in this case, is the back of a 200-kilogram fanged animal. This is where the main question of this episode arises. who's getting the most out of this? The mongoose is clearly feeding. The benefit is obvious and immediate. But what about the warthog? Is this large animal really allowing a small predator to rummage around on its face simply out of politeness? Scientists suggest no. Politeness has nothing to do with it. The warthog receives a very real benefit, getting rid of parasites that can cause inflammation, infections, and constant itching. In the savannah, where a veterinarian is unavailable and infection can be life-threatening, regular grooming is literally a matter of health. Some researchers even note that such skincare is especially important during the rainy season, when ticks are more prevalent and wounds from fights between male warthogs take longer to heal due to the humidity. But here arises a mystery that has no clear answer yet. Why does the warthog allow mongooses to approach, rather than simply scratching itself more intensely against the trees? The answer, apparently, is that trees can't reach the inside of the ear or the crease under the eye. But the mongoose can. And it does so much more delicately than it seems at first glance. Otherwise, the warthog, with its fiery temperament and sharp fangs, simply wouldn't allow such treatment. And this is the moment when the viewer should really tense up, because what follows is the most interesting part. The mongooses aren't just combing through the fur on their backs, they're literally climbing into the predator's mouth, where the fangs grow, capable of ripping through a lion's hide. What happens when the tiny animal finds itself centimeters away from jaws that could crush it in a single movement? Is the warthog nervous? Could it accidentally kill its little doctor with a simple jerk of its head? And most importantly, how did these two such different animals learn to trust each other so much that such a scene has become not a rare exception, but an almost daily ritual in some corners of Uganda? The warthog falls onto its side. Heavy, clumsy, nearly 200 kilograms of muscle and fat sink into the dust. The mongooses immediately swarm around it, like ants around fallen fruit. One of the little creatures burrows right into the mouth, where fangs the length of a human finger grow. Another second, and the mongoose disappears almost completely into a fold of skin near the giant's ear. An observer witnessing such a sight for the first time will surely hold their breath. One sharp jerk of the head, and nothing remains of the little doctor. But there is no breakthrough. Zoologists studying warthog behavior in Queen Elizabeth National Park noted a striking detail. While grooming, the large animal behaves with marked calm. It stops moving abruptly, as if deliberately controlling itself. Some researchers describe this state as a kind of standby mode. The muscles are relaxed, the head is slightly tilted, and breathing is slow. This is strikingly different from how a warthog reacts to danger. When threatened, it instantly raises its head, snorts, and is ready to pounce. It turns out that the animal perceives interaction with mongooses as something fundamentally different, not a threat. How exactly this recognition develops is a question that science has not yet fully answered. One theory is that it's a matter of repetition. If a troop of mongooses regularly appears near the same group of warthogs in the same territory, the animals simply become accustomed to each other. Repeated positive experiences, cleaning without harm, gradually build something akin to tolerance, if not trust. The mechanics of the process are far more complex than simply a mongoose walks along the back and eats ticks. Observers describe an almost choreographed sequence of actions. First, the mongooses inspect the most exposed areas, the back, sides, and the base of the tail. Only then, when the warthog has finally calmed down and lies down, do the animals move on to more sensitive areas, the eyelids, ears, and the folds around the mouth. These are where the largest number of ticks accumulate, because the skin in these areas is thinner and more vascular, making it easier for the parasites to access blood. An important caveat is worth making here, often overlooked in popular retellings of such stories. Scientists still haven't reached a consensus on the extent to which the warthog understands what's happening and whether it recognizes the benefit of the procedure. or simply tolerates mild skin irritation that resolves on its own during the process. This distinction is important. Conscious cooperation is one thing, and a simple biological reaction in which the touch of a mongoose is physically felt more pleasant than the itch of a tick bite is quite another. One way or another, the fact remains. This interaction is a type of relationship between species that biologists call mutualism. Simply put, it's a situation where two different animal species benefit from coexistence without being host and parasite or predator and prey. Both parties benefit. The mongoose gets food, and it's nutritious and readily available. No need to dig for beetles or chase grasshoppers. The warthog gets a kind of sanitization treatment, reducing the risk of inflammation and skin irritation. To understand the scale of the problem mongooses solve, it's worth citing some specific figures. According to parasitological studies of ungulates in the African savannah, a single large warthog can harbor up to several hundred ticks of various species simultaneously during the rainy season. Some of these are concentrated in the ears and around the eyes, areas with the highest blood vessel density and the least accessible to the animal. Each tick can carry infections and cause localized skin inflammation. Given that warthogs live in constant contact with soil, water, and other animals near their watering holes, the risk of infection accumulates quickly. Regular grooming by mongooses, according to researchers, significantly reduces this risk. Although precise figures showing the health differences between maintained and unmaintained groups of warthogs remain the subject of further research. There's another risk that's rarely considered: the risk to the mongoose itself. While grooming might seem like a safe stroll across another animal's back, in reality, the animal is constantly in dangerous proximity to an animal capable of inflicting a fatal injury with one careless movement. Warthog fangs aren't just decoration. Males use them in fights with each other, and the wounds from such clashes can be serious. Getting caught between these fangs when a warthog suddenly shakes its head because of a horsefly bite or a sudden rustle in the grass is a scenario that could, theoretically, end in the mongoose's death. This is why zoologists believe this behavior did not develop by chance, but rather as a result of a long process of mutual adaptation, likely spanning many generations of both species. Mongooses, according to observations, have developed a distinctive manner of movement around larger animals, smooth, predictable, without sudden leaps that could provoke a defensive reaction from their host. Warthogs, in turn, seem to have learned to distinguish the vibration of a mongoose's feet from the touch of a predator or the bite of an insect. But here's what's particularly curious, and this brings us to the next twist in the story. The relationships between specific groups of mongooses and specific warthogs don't seem like the chance encounters of two strangers in the savannah. Observers have repeatedly recorded the same family of mongooses appearing alongside the same warthogs over the course of several days, and sometimes weeks, each keeping to roughly the same territory. This raises a question far more interesting than simply who's using whom. Do the animals remember each other? Does something resembling a familiar, recognizable bond form between specific individuals? Not friendship in the human sense, but something that compels a warthog to seek out the company of that particular group of mongooses rather than any other encountered along the way. And if a warthog leaves its usual territory, say during the dry season, when herds are forced to migrate in search of water, what happens to the mongooses? Do they remain in the same territory, waiting for their client to return, or do they try to follow? And do warthogs have similar relationships with other savanna cleaning animals, for example with birds, which are often seen perched on the backs of large ungulates? When the dry season arrives and their familiar mud puddles dry up, warthogs uproot their nests and wander off in search of water and fresh grass. It would be logical to assume that mongooses, tied to their territory, lose their client and, along with them, a source of easy food. However, zoologists' observations reveal a more complex picture. Dwarf mongooses are animals with a fairly wide, yet still limited range. Their family groups adhere to a specific area of the savannah where their burrows are located, usually in old termite mounds. If the warthogs wander beyond this territory, their bond is temporarily interrupted. But here's what's interesting. As soon as a new group of warthogs appears in the same territory, the same mongooses, according to eyewitnesses, begin grooming them as well, almost immediately, as if a newly learned ritual were triggered automatically. This observation is important because it clarifies the nature of the relationship. It appears that it's not a matter of personal attachment to a specific animal, but rather a stable behavioral strategy tied to a place and species, rather than a specific individual. Simply put, the mongooses aren't friends with a specific warthog. They've mastered a profitable method of extracting food from any warthog that enters their territory. Thus, the romantic image of personal affection between animals is erased, but it is replaced by an image far more impressive from a biological perspective: a stable, reproducible behavior pattern that has become ingrained within the species as a whole. This is not a chance encounter between two sympathetic animals, but the result of many generations of natural selection, where beneficial behavior has been reinforced and passed on. It's worth noting that mongooses are far from the only groomers tolerated by large African ungulates. A similar role is played on the backs of buffalo, giraffes, zebras, and even warthogs by Buphagus starlings, Buphagus, birds that specialize in pecking ticks and other parasites from the skin of large animals. At first glance, the roles of starlings and mongooses are identical. Both species feed on their host's parasites. But a closer look reveals significant differences. Birds can climb anywhere on an animal's body, including the highest parts of the back, which a land predator like the mongoose simply can't reach. However, the mongoose has an advantage that birds lack: tenacious feet and the ability to carefully, literally with their fingers, explore the smallest folds of skin around the eyes, in the ears, between the hooves, places where a bird's beak is less effective and sometimes simply can't reach due to its shape. It turns out that these two completely different cleaners, the feathered and the four-legged, don't compete with each other for food, but rather address different aspects of the same problem, like two different specialists in the same clinic, each with their own narrow specialty. Another observation adds color to this picture. Some researchers documenting warthog behavior have noted that the animals are able to differentiate between types of interactions based on the intensity of their response. A warthog reacts to a horsefly bite with a sharp twitch of the skin and an attempt to swat the insect away with its tail or ear. The presence of a mongoose, even when it bites the skin while eating a tick, results in a much more restrained, almost non-existent reaction. This may indicate that the sensations of a mongoose's manipulation are physically different from those of a parasite or irritating insect bite. Perhaps the mere presence of a cleaner is perceived by the animal as a relief rather than an irritation, as the removal of an itchy tick provides physical relief that outweighs the mild discomfort of the process itself. However, this area of animal behavior has not yet been fully studied, and science has not yet provided any definitive conclusions about the warthog's internal sensations. Animals, unlike humans, cannot tell researchers exactly what they are feeling. What can be said for certain is that such relationships are so mutually beneficial that they have become entrenched as a stable behavioral pattern, observed in wild animals for decades and likely much longer. It's just that systematic study has only begun relatively recently, and herein lies perhaps the main lesson of the mongoose-warthog story. Nature rarely fits into simple categories of predator and prey or friend and foe. Far more often in the wild, a third option operates: a mutual bargain made without a single word, without a contract, but tested over thousands of generations and enduring precisely because it has proven beneficial to all involved. A warthog doesn't save a mongoose from starvation out of kindness, and a mongoose doesn't protect a warthog from parasites out of generosity. Both species have simply found a way to benefit each other without harming each other. And this balance has proven so stable that it has become ingrained in both species' behavior, almost reflexively. Not altruism, not friendship, but a precise, nature-honed calculation in which all parties benefit. Perhaps this is precisely the true beauty of wild nature. Not the noble gestures that people often try to see in animal behavior, but the surprisingly rational solutions that evolution finds without any rationality, simply by trial and error, through the survival of the most successful strategies. Let's return to where we started. Dawn, a mud puddle, a giant with finger-long fangs, emerges into the open. A flock of tiny animals runs up to him. A few more minutes, and the warthog, cleared of parasites, leisurely wanders off into the tall savannah grass, while the mongooses, well-fed and content, return to their business, digging for beetles, playing around a termite mound, guarding their territory from neighboring family groups. Everyone got their due. No one was hurt. And the next morning, this whole scene will likely repeat itself. Because this is precisely how nature has orchestrated one of the most astonishing alliances of the African savannah. If you found this story about mongooses and warthogs as amazing as we did, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new episodes about the most unexpected wildlife pairings. Give it a like if you watched to the end, and let us know in the comments, who do you think is the more cunning of the two? The little mongoose who found a free lunch, or the giant warthog who got a personal doctor delivered right to his home?